When you dream of freedom, you rarely stop to think about how high its price can be. One dinner, and an entire life begins to shatter into tiny fragments. She wanted to breathe new life into their relationship, to open the door to change. But along with it came doubts, resentments, and a chilling emptiness. Every forced laugh, every averted glance, all of it became the beginning of the end. While one tried desperately to save the remnants of the past, the other was already building a future without looking back. Where is the line between love and betrayal? Can you stop the fall once the ground has already cracked beneath your feet? There are no grand victories here, only a subtle, painful realization. Sometimes the most sincere dreams lead to the most devastating mistakes, and when the truth finally surfaces, salvation is found in places you never expected to look. Greetings, my dear friend. I am very happy that you are watching my video, and I will be even happier if you subscribe to my channel. This will make me even happier. Let's get started. No, this can't be real. My voice cracked as I spoke. Brian, please. I think we've made a terrible choice. We? Or just you? He murmured, almost too quietly. You're wrong, Karen. This is precisely what you wanted. Remember? A progressive marriage. Hi, I'm Karen, and this is the story of how I managed to unravel my own world. I had spent the entire afternoon carefully crafting Brian's favorite meal, grilled salmon, perfectly roasted vegetables, and a fresh quinoa salad. I set the table with precision, letting the wine breathe in polished crystal glasses, obsessing over every small detail. I needed everything to be flawless for what I was about to suggest. I'm not saying there's something wrong between us, I began carefully, catching the moment when Brian's fork froze in midair, a flaky piece of salmon tumbling from the tines. Maybe it's time for something different. The look that crossed his face, part disbelief, part heartbreak, is something I'll never forget. For a second, a laugh almost escaped me from the sheer absurdity, but I stifled it. I had to stay composed. I'd been contemplating this conversation for weeks, ever since Julia had confided in me about her arrangement with Mark. It sounded exhilarating, revolutionary. Why shouldn't we explore the same? I leaned across the table, the adrenaline sharp in my chest. An open marriage, Brian. It's what progressive couples are doing these days. It keeps things vibrant, exciting. I hesitated, studying his reaction. Don't you think we could use a spark? Are you unhappy with me? He finally said, voice breaking, pain flickering in his eyes. The sight crushed me, but I forced myself to stay the course. I wrapped my fingers around his hand. Of course not, darling. I'm incredibly happy, but think about it. We'd preserve our rock-solid bond while inviting fresh energy into our lives. His worried eyes searched mine, but I pushed aside the surge of guilt. It's not about dissatisfaction, Brian. It's about growing together. I could almost see his thoughts whirring behind his eyes. Brian, kind, generous Brian, who had always put my happiness first, sometimes at his own expense. I loved that about him. Maybe, deep down, I was trying to disrupt that certainty. Maybe I craved a little mess. Karen, I don't know. It's a lot. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? He asked, forehead furrowed, the forgotten salmon wilting on his plate. What about jealousy? What if things get messy? What if one of us falls for someone else? He was unraveling the fears I had expected. I flashed a practiced smile, feeling momentum on my side. I'm positive, Brian. Trust me. This will only make us stronger. We'll set boundaries. We'll communicate constantly. It'll be an adventure, one we face together. I took a careful sip of my wine, lining up my next reassurances. Jealousy? It's just another hurdle for us to conquer. We'll grow past it, deepen our trust. As for feelings, I leaned closer, my excitement bubbling over. We'll be completely transparent. We won't let fleeting emotions interfere with what we have. If anything, this will knit us closer. We're adults, Brian. We can handle this. Our love is unshakable. That won't change. He swallowed, his appetite clearly gone, the tension thick between us. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. Okay, he whispered, the word barely making it across the table. I clapped my hands together, giddy with relief. Oh, Brian, you'll see. This is exactly what we need. I immediately dove into a flurry of excited plans, rules, dating apps, scheduling. Brian nodded, his expression strained, eyes distant. I was too swept up in the rush of my imagined future to notice how every enthusiastic word cracked the foundation we had spent years building. I spoke of freedom and reinvention, blind to the quiet, gathering storm between us. Our dinner sat untouched, the candles burning down, and somewhere, deep within the invisible fabric of our life, something precious began to tear. And so, friends, that's how I started the slow, painful collapse of the life we had made. At exactly 7:47 p.m., I heard the front door creak open. I pasted on a smile as Karen stepped inside, though the spark she'd left with had clearly dimmed. All evening, I had been drowning in a sea of worst-case scenarios. But the woman who returned wasn't beaming with joy. She looked frayed around the edges. Oh, it was amazing, she gushed, her voice too shrill, too forced. James is just incredible. Did you know he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro? And he's full of amazing stories from his time in the Peace Corps. I nodded stiffly, my mouth dry and bitter, struggling to appear supportive. Sounds like quite the guy, I said hollowly. Karen rattled on, describing the charming restaurant, the endless conversation, the sparkling wine. But the more she spoke, the clearer the disconnect became, between her animated words and the exhaustion weighing down her face. She was doing her best to put on a show of enthusiasm, but it wasn't convincing. Her gestures were too large, her laughter edged with strain. It felt more like she was acting out a scene she thought she needed to perform rather than sharing anything real. And then we said goodnight, she finished, her voice trailing off into a whisper. I watched as she kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch, completely spent. The weight of her story hovered in the room long after her words stopped. Her posture told a very different story than the cheerful image she had tried to paint. A part of me longed to tell her she could stop pretending, that she didn't have to act brave for my sake. But another, harsher part of me felt a grim sort of satisfaction. After all, wasn't this what she had chosen? This was the version of marriage she had decided was right for us. That's great, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile that tasted bitter. I'm glad you had fun. She straightened her back stiffly, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've got another date scheduled for next week, she said brightly. You know what they say, variety keeps life interesting. I gave a small nod, watching her retreat into the bathroom. Moments later, the hiss of the shower filled the apartment. I sagged into the armchair, pressing my hands against my face. The sound of running water mixed with the steady ticking of the clock, creating a dissonant soundtrack for the strange, new life we were living. It felt like we were trapped in a surreal play, with Karen doggedly clinging to a character that didn't fit her. The more she pretended it was normal, the more I wanted to grab her and make her remember who she truly was. It was like being caught inside a dream turned inside out, grasping at the broken pieces. As I sat there listening to the cascade of water, a thought rooted itself deep within me. If these were the new rules, maybe it was time I stopped playing the old game. Maybe it was time I stopped being the steady, predictable man she'd grown tired of. The idea sent a cold shiver down my spine, half excitement, half fear. What would happen if I embraced this new reality too? What would Karen think if I started seeing other people myself? When she stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling around her and her hair damp against her face, I pushed the thought to the back of my mind. For now, we would carry on with this performance, smiling falsely, offering hollow support, but deep down, something had shifted in me. A quiet, determined seed had been planted. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "How was your evening?" I straightened up and forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. "It was good. I just did some reading." Her gaze lingered on me, searching my face for something, maybe cracks in the facade. I knew I had to stay in character. "I'm happy you had a good time tonight," I said, injecting warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. "Thanks," she replied, her words carrying a tremor of doubt. "Are you really okay with everything?" she asked cautiously. "Of course," I said breezily, brushing the question away with a shrug. "We're just trying something different, right?" She smiled at that, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear for where all of this might lead. I chose to ignore it. A new version of me was beginning to emerge, and I was curious and a little eager to see where it would take me. Karen had no idea just how complicated things were about to get. From Karen's point of view, the faint clatter of weights hitting the gym floor drew my attention across the room. Brian, finishing up his workout, wiped his forehead with a towel, a satisfied grin playing at the edges of his mouth. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, pretending to stay engrossed in my book, feeling an unsettling emptiness settle over me. Something had shifted in him lately. He seemed freer somehow, but also more distant. When had that started? It had been several weeks since we had jumped into this open marriage idea, and none of it was unfolding the way I had imagined. Instead of feeling invigorated by my dates, I came home feeling hollow. Night after night, I forced smiles and laughter, but the charade was wearing thin. The excitement I had hoped for had dissolved into something cold and unfamiliar. "Hey," Brian said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. "How was your day?" I looked up, momentarily caught off guard. "Oh, it was fine," I replied, pasting on a cheerful smile that felt brittle and false. "Just the usual work stuff." He nodded, though a shadow of concern flickered briefly across his face. "You seem a little off. Are you okay?" I shrugged, trying to seem casual, unwilling to show the messy knot of feelings tangled inside me. "Just tired, I guess. All this dating is more exhausting than I thought it would be." His mouth twitched into a teasing smirk, but I caught the edge beneath it. "Welcome to the club," he said, his tone light but with an unmistakable bite. I wanted to laugh it off, to brush away the sting, but jealousy twisted in my gut. Hadn't I been the one who told him to embrace this new life? "Yeah, well, maybe I'm not cut out for it," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "You seem to be handling it just fine," I added sharply, an edge slipping into my words. His smile faltered briefly, and guilt pricked at me immediately. "I'm just trying to keep things fair," he said quietly. "But if you're not happy, maybe we need to rethink this whole thing." His words hung heavily in the space between us, thick with consequences we weren't ready to face. A part of me yearned to retreat, to slip back into the comfort of the life we had so carefully crafted before everything changed. Yet, another part, the one that had been awakened by this new existence, smoldered with a quiet defiance. Maybe it wasn't about pleasure, I thought, holding his gaze. Maybe it was about stretching beyond our limits, about uncovering hidden parts of ourselves within the storm. Brian arched an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Finding ourselves, huh? So what have you discovered so far?" he asked, his voice both curious and challenging. The question struck me hard, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. Had I found anything real? Or was I simply chasing an imagined version of what freedom was supposed to feel like? "I'm not sure," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "I'm still figuring it out." Something in Brian's face softened. The guarded tension melted into something more open, almost tender. And suddenly, the vast distance between us didn't seem quite so insurmountable. Maybe we can figure it out together, he said softly, stepping a little closer. I wanted to believe him, to grasp onto that flickering hope that we could find our way back. But the heavy burden of all that we'd endured loomed between us. Yeah, maybe, I said, though my voice trembled with doubt. As we stood suspended in that fragile moment, a sense of inevitability washed over me. We were teetering on the brink of something, but whether it was salvation or total collapse, I couldn't tell. Brian, meanwhile, seemed to be flourishing in ways I hadn't foreseen. He had thrown himself into the gym, his physique sharpening, his movements growing more confident with each passing day. His wardrobe had shifted too. Gone were the old, familiar clothes, replaced by a sleeker, edgier style. It was as if he had unearthed a reservoir of self-assurance that left me reeling. The Brian I had always known, dependable, unchanging, was being replaced by someone more fearless, more self-reliant, and I struggled to make peace with it. "Hey," I said, trying to sound light and casual. "Want to hear about my date last night?" He glanced up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "If you want to," he replied with a shrug, then returned his attention to the screen. The offhandedness of his response hit me like a blow, leaving an aching hollow in my chest. When had he stopped caring? When had he stopped needing to know? The space between us yawned wide, and the terrifying part was how normal that emptiness had begun to feel. Standing there, watching him, I couldn't help but wonder, how had we let it get this far? The excitement I once chased in this arrangement had withered into something lonelier, more excruciating. I thought back to those early days when Brian had listened stiffly, discomfort etched into every tense line of his body. Now it seemed my attempts to share barely even registered, and somehow that indifference cut deeper than his early awkwardness ever had. "It's fine," I said, the words tumbling out awkwardly. Nothing important happened. He nodded absently, his eyes still fixed on his screen. A sharp wave of frustration surged through me. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to force him to see me. But I stayed frozen. I couldn't move. After all, this was the life I had asked for, wasn't it? The freedom I had fought for. But I hadn't realized that freedom would feel so much like being abandoned. "I have a work event this week," Brian said suddenly, breaking the oppressive silence, a flicker of excitement lighting up his face. "Could meet some new people." His words twisted something deep inside me. "Oh," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. The image of him laughing, bonding with strangers, forming connections that had nothing to do with me, made my stomach knot. I forced a smile onto my face, even as my heart fractured. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I had thrown open the doors to this life, convinced it would spark adventure and renewal. Instead, it felt like each step forward only drove the wedge between us deeper. "Anyone special you're hoping to meet?" I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could, though my pulse hammered in my ears. He shrugged, a small, unreadable smile tugging at his mouth. "Maybe. We'll see," he said before looking back at his phone. A wave of cold dread swept through me, as if the ground beneath my feet was crumbling away. The dynamic between us had shifted, and it wasn't just a phase. Brian wasn't merely adjusting to the life I had proposed, he was thriving in it, and that realization chilled me to the core. I forced another brittle smile, even though he didn't bother to look up. "Well, have a good time," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Turning away, I swallowed hard against the lump rising in my throat. A brutal, inescapable truth slammed into me. I was losing him. The dream I had clung to, that we could grow stronger through this, was coming undone before my eyes. The laughter, the closeness we once shared, now seemed like echoes from another lifetime, slipping further from my grasp with every passing day. And the most painful part? It was my fault. I had been the one to invite this life in, convinced it would bring us happiness and growth. Instead, I was watching Brian drift farther and farther away, widening a gap I no longer knew how to bridge. Meanwhile, from Brian's perspective, the muted glow of my laptop screen flickered across the dim living room, stretching ghostly shadows across the walls. Outside, the darkness pressed heavily against the windows, and inside, the silence wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. It was late, long past midnight, but sleep was nowhere near. My mind spun relentlessly, trapped in a loop of second-guessing and doubt. A faint sound broke the stillness, a restless rustle from the bedroom. Karen was tossing in her sleep, her body shifting fitfully, as if even in her dreams she couldn't find peace. I couldn't help but wonder if she was replaying her dates in her mind, caught up in the same thrill she had once spoken of so breathlessly. Perhaps she, too, lay awake in the darkness, grappling with the consequences of the choices that had brought us here. Exhaling heavily, I redirected my attention to my laptop, finally composing a message to someone I had been quietly corresponding with, Monica. She was clever, quick-witted, and, most importantly, not Karen. As I hit send, a volatile mix of guilt and exhilaration raced through me. Monica and I had been exchanging messages for several weeks. Although we hadn't crossed any physical lines, the emotional intimacy was undeniable. She made me feel valued, seen in a way that had been missing between Karen and me for far too long. Just then, the door to the bedroom creaked open softly, and I quickly minimized the chat. Karen emerged, moving sluggishly, her hair a tangled mess, her gaze still heavy with sleep. "Brian, why are you still up?" she asked, her voice rough with drowsiness. Forcing a relaxed smile, I tried to sound as nonchalant as possible. "Just answering a few work emails," I said, hoping my voice didn't betray me. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was trying to peel back the surface and see what I was hiding. A charged silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. She drifted to the couch and dropped into it, and in that instant, I felt trapped between two opposing worlds. One was suffocating yet familiar, the other crackled with potential and new beginnings. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my words barely more than a murmur. Karen gave a small nod, but something flickered in her eyes. Suspicion, unmistakable and growing. Recently, she had been watching me more closely. In her gaze lingered a confusing blend of doubt and something even heavier. Fear, perhaps. "Don't stay up too late," she mumbled, turning back toward the bedroom, her voice weary. When the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a shaky breath, not realizing until then that I had been holding it. The guilt gnawed at me, but under it was something sharper. Resentment. Hadn't this been her idea all along? Her grand experiment to find fulfillment elsewhere? I reopened the chat with Monica, and seeing her latest message, lively and warm, instantly thawed some of the cold that had taken root in our house. Every conversation with her felt like a tether pulling me further away from the uncertainty Karen now embodied. As I began typing, my fingers trembled with anticipation. I craved this connection, this attention I hadn't even realized I was starving for. It terrified me and thrilled me. We had made tentative plans to meet for coffee later that week. Just coffee, I kept reminding myself. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was a glimmer of a different life, one untainted by the wreckage of our crumbling open marriage. Setting the meeting time with Monica illuminated the vast gulf between Karen's experience and mine. Her bold experiment had failed spectacularly. After every date she returned from, the glow in her eyes was dimmer, her excitement increasingly forced, her anger leaking through every gesture. It was painfully obvious. Meanwhile, I felt like I was shedding layers I hadn't realized were smothering me. The thought of finally meeting Monica sent a rush of excitement through my chest. She was untouched by the wreckage of my past, a symbol of something clean and unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing free air. The very atmosphere around me seemed to hum with new possibilities. Despite the persistent pangs of guilt, the initial pain and betrayal I had once felt had dulled, replaced by a fragile yet growing sense of hope. I was rediscovering pieces of myself I thought had been lost forever, reconnecting with dreams and parts of life I had long abandoned. Monica stood at the heart of this reawakening. Tomorrow, I promised myself, tomorrow I would tell Karen everything about Monica, about my feelings, about the truth we had both been running from. It was time to let go of the lies and face what our choices had wrought. As sleep finally claimed me, my thoughts clung to the impending coffee date. For the first time in ages, a tender spark of hope warmed my chest. Hope for a future that perhaps no longer had Karen in it. And now, from Karen's perspective. The house sat in a heavy silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. I was curled up on the couch, a lukewarm cup of tea sitting untouched on the table before me. My eyes stayed glued to the front door. Brian was gone again, almost certainly with her. When he left earlier tonight, I had managed a strained, "have a good night," though the lump in my throat almost gave me away. He barely looked up from his phone, replying with a careless shrug before vanishing into the night. My thoughts drifted bitterly back to that night, the night I had floated the idea that wrecked us. Back then, I had been foolish enough to believe that opening our marriage could fix what was broken, that it would somehow draw us closer together. Instead, it had dismantled our bond, piece by agonizing piece, until all that remained were fragments I couldn't piece back together. My own attempts at dating had fizzled out weeks ago. Each encounter only underscored the hollow space growing inside me, a constant reminder of the enormous gamble I had made and lost. The excitement I had once longed for had soured into a gnawing loneliness, seeping into every part of my life. At the same time, Brian had flourished. The quiet, cautious man I had once married had evolved into someone confident, someone who no longer seemed to need me. The sharp squeal of tires outside yanked me from my spiraling thoughts. My chest tightened as the door swung open and Brian walked in. He looked relaxed, content, a stark contrast to my restless state. "You're still up?" he remarked, mild surprise flickering across his face. There was no apology in his voice, no hurried excuse for his late return. When had that changed? "I couldn't sleep," I murmured, studying his features for traces of the man I used to adore. "Brian, can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling on the verge of breaking. He let out a weary sigh, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. "It's late, Karen. Can't this wait until morning?" "It can't," I whispered, emotion tightening my throat. "Please, Brian," I pleaded, my heart pounding painfully. "I think we made a huge mistake." He stared at me, his expression impossible to read. "We?" he repeated quietly, the word hanging heavy in the space between us. "This was your idea," he said, voice low and final. "You wanted this, remember? A modern relationship. Space to breathe." Tears burned my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. "But that's not what I want anymore," I confessed, choking back a sob. "Can't we take it back? Just erase it?" he asked, a bitter laugh cutting through the stillness. "Go back? To what, Karen? To you feeling caged? To me being invisible?" he added, each word hitting like a slap. "No, there's no undoing this." I stood frozen as he turned and disappeared down the hallway. His hallway now. The soft click of his door closing echoed like a gunshot in my ears. I collapsed onto the couch, the tears coming faster now, each one a sharp reminder of what I had shattered. The full weight of my mistake, what I had broken, what I had lost, pressed down on me. I had unleashed something I couldn't control, and there was no way to reverse it. The sounds of our shared past, his laughter, the warmth of his voice, the security I once took for granted, felt like distant memories, slipping further away. The hope I had clung to when proposing this experiment had rotted into despair. I curled up tightly on the couch, the oppressive silence swallowing me whole. How had I ever thought this would save us? The freedom I had once craved had become a lonely prison, and the fragile connection between us now frayed, hanging by a thread. From Brian's perspective, the room seemed heavy with a silence that made every step feel deliberate as I entered what was now clearly my space. Karen was crumpled on the sofa, her face blotchy and streaked with tears. A part of me, a small buried part that remembered loving her, stirred, but the instinct to comfort her had long since withered. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. Even as the words left my mouth, I saw her brace herself. She knew. Deep down, she had always known. She wasn't oblivious, just blinded by her own desperate hope. "Brian, please," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I made a mistake. We can fix this," she insisted. "We can go back." I gave a short, humorless laugh that bounced off the empty walls. "Go back?" I echoed, the bitterness sharper than I intended. "Back to what, Karen? Back to feeling overlooked? Back to feeling like I never mattered?" I shook my head slowly. "You really think we can undo everything that's happened?" Even I was surprised by how harsh the words sounded, but there was a strange relief in speaking the truth aloud. Karen's face crumbled, her last shred of hope disintegrating before me. "I thought it would help us grow," she whispered, her voice desperate and raw. "Grow?" I snapped. "It tore us apart, Karen. You wanted new experiences. Well, this," I said, motioning vaguely around the room, "this is where it brought us." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She finally understood. There was no easy fix. "We can find our way back," she murmured, barely audible. "Back," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "There is no going back, Karen. You made sure of that when you decided our life wasn't enough." She flinched as though I'd struck her, and for a brief moment, guilt sparked within me. But the damage had been done. She had believed this would bring us closer, that it would strengthen us. "Exciting," I said coldly, spitting the word out like a curse. "You wanted excitement. Congratulations, you got it. Just not the kind you dreamed of." The words lingered, cutting through the silence like shards of glass, undeniable, unchangeable. The path we were on was one she had chosen, even if she hadn't realized where it would lead. The anguish in her eyes said more than words ever could. Deep down, she knew it too. Brian. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered. Her voice trembled, barely louder than a sigh. "I thought we could handle it. I believed we were strong enough to survive." "Strong enough?" I echoed, disbelief slicing into my words. "You honestly thought opening up our marriage would make us stronger? You threw away everything we built for fleeting moments with strangers." Karen shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought it would bring the spark back, make us feel alive again." There was such raw sincerity in her voice that for an instant my anger faltered. But the wounds were too deep, and I hardened instead of softening. "And now look where it's left us," I said, my voice colder than before. "You're lost, Karen. So am I, and I don't think there's any way back from here." She opened her mouth, maybe to protest, but the words never came. She just stared at me, her eyes heavy with sorrow and resignation. In that moment, I knew. The gap between us had widened too far to ever be crossed. I drifted toward the bookshelf, letting my fingers brush against the worn spines of books we'd once picked out together. Each title whispered of long-forgotten afternoons, of lazy Sundays wrapped up in dreams and laughter. But now it all felt like a distant memory, belonging to someone else's life. I've met someone, I said, turning slowly to face her. Someone who accepts me as I am. Someone who doesn't need to break us to feel something again. Her face crumpled at the words, and more tears rushed to her eyes. Brian, no, please, she sobbed. I love you. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I let myself really see her then, the woman I had once promised to weather every storm with. She seemed so small, so shattered, and for a moment the ache in my chest almost undid me. But the bitterness inside quickly smothered any flicker of mercy. Karen, I said, my voice rough and uneven, this isn't just a bad phase. This is a complete shift in who we are. And after finding someone who reminds me what it means to be truly alive, I can't keep lying to myself. Her body sagged as though crushed by the weight of my words. She wiped at her tears, her eyes pleading. But we can rebuild, she whispered hoarsely. We can find a new beginning. Just give us a chance. Please, Brian. I shook my head slowly, feeling the finality of it all settle heavily between us. Time won't heal this, I said quietly. You wanted something different, and now there's no way back. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of my words. I watched as the last remnants of hope faded from her eyes, and it hurt more than I dared admit. But somewhere deep inside, I knew the truth. What we had was broken beyond repair. Even though I felt a swell of pity for her, a hard resolve rooted itself in me. This was the consequence of choices she had made, not me. It's over, Karen, I said firmly. I'm done pretending we're something we're not anymore. She recoiled as if the words had physically struck her. But what about the vows we made? She whispered, clinging desperately to the memory of what we once shared. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. You shattered those vows the moment you decided we needed to open our marriage, I said. You can't just pick and choose the parts of commitment you want to keep. It doesn't work that way. Her face fell as the full gravity of the situation landed on her. I wondered if she finally understood the damage she had caused. You don't have to end this, she pleaded, her voice breaking apart. We can still fix it. We can still find our way back. Back to what? I snapped, the anger flaring in my chest. Back to lying to ourselves while everything inside us falls apart. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just stared at me, searching for the man who had once loved her so fiercely. But that man was long gone, and all she saw now was someone she couldn't reach. Brian, she finally whispered, fragile and broken. I didn't know. I thought we could survive it. I thought it would bring us closer. Closer, I repeated, the word feeling poisonous on my tongue. No, Karen. It didn't bring us closer. It ripped open every crack we tried to ignore. You wanted excitement, but it only drove a wedge we can't remove. The silence that followed was suffocating, so thick it was almost a physical thing. Karen seemed to collapse inward, her last defenses crumbling around her. I watched her unravel, feeling a sharp, painful blend of sadness and grim justice. These were the consequences she had set into motion. As much as it tore me apart, I knew the truth. There was no way back to what we had. I was done pretending that we were still on the same path. I'm sorry, she finally murmured, her voice so faint it barely stirred the air. I never imagined it would come to this. Neither did I replied, though deep inside I recognized the truth. We had already crossed the point of no return. The door behind me might as well have been locked forever. I moved across the room, my hand settling on the doorknob. I'm going to stay at Monica's place for a while. Someone will come to pick up my things soon. Monica, Karen repeated, the name shattering against her lips like glass, leaving her sounding hollow and broken. You're leaving because of her? She asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I turned back toward her, meeting her eyes without wavering. I'm not leaving for Monica, Karen. I'm leaving for me. She's just the start of a new path. A path I wouldn't have found if Karen hadn't been so intent on reinventing what we had. The cruel twist was that her effort to save us had only shown me the exit, the way toward someone I had forgotten how to be. Please, Karen gasped, stretching out a shaking hand toward me. Don't do this. I'll do anything, she begged. We can try counseling. We can fix it. I stepped further back, creating a space between us that no amount of pleading could close. Counseling won't fix what's broken, I said, my voice heavy with a sadness I couldn't disguise. This isn't something a few promises or sessions can heal. It's deeper than that. We've become strangers in the same house. Her tears clung to her lashes, but I forced myself not to look away. I believed in us, she whispered, her voice raw. I thought we could overcome this, that it would make us stronger. Stronger? I echoed bitterly. All it did was reveal how fragile we really were. We've been clinging to something lifeless. This was the wake-up call I needed. Pain clenched in my chest as I shook my head. I can't keep pretending, Karen. I refuse to. A heavy silence draped over us, dense and final. I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. She understood finally that I was serious. The last flicker of hope she held on to guttered and died. Brian, she breathed, barely audible. I never wanted this to happen. I know, I answered, mourning what we used to be. But we have to stop lying to ourselves. Whatever we've been trying to hold on to, it's been gone for a long time. I took a deep breath. We both deserve a real shot at happiness, even if that means finding it separately. It's over, Karen, I said, as gently as I could manage. I hope you find whatever it is you've been searching for. I hope your idea of modern love brings you the excitement you wanted. Without waiting for a reply, I opened the door and walked out, pulling it shut behind me with a quiet finality. Through the thick wood, I could still hear the broken sound of her sobs. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The man who might have stayed, who might have forgiven her desperate attempts to save what couldn't be saved, was already gone. Outside, Monica waited by the car, offering a soft, understanding smile. As I approached, the burden of guilt and bitterness that had weighed me down for so long began to ease. Karen had wished for a marriage built for the modern age, and in a way she got it, just not in the way she had dreamed. I started the car and pulled away from the house, from the ruins of what we once called life together. I realized I didn't feel pity. This path hadn't been chosen by me alone. Karen had set it in motion. I was just following it to its inevitable conclusion. The experiment was over, and from its wreckage, I had emerged, stronger, more certain, finally free. The open road stretched endlessly ahead, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with new memories, new beginnings. I glanced at Monica, her eyes bright with quiet encouragement, and knew without hesitation I had made the right choice. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was free. Free from expectations, free from chains I hadn't even realized I wore. The future was unknown, yes, but it was mine. And for the first time, that uncertainty felt thrilling. I had stepped out of the long gray shadow of my past and into the blinding light of possibility. Whatever lay ahead, I was ready for it. Our story comes to an end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this story, please check out other videos on this channel. See you soon, my dear friend.